I think we'll just go ahead and get started. Seeing a couple more people trickle in, but again, Doug Heye, veteran political strategist and CNN commentator. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you're doing well. You're in DC, right?
I am. It's a bit empty right now, and the good news is there's no traffic. The bad news is there's no traffic.
Of course, of course. Well, we're really grateful to have you here, and we'll just get started on some questions. We're going to start with the vice presidential nominee for the Democratic Party. Um, what is, oh, sorry, we just had a bit of a technical thing. But anyway, so we see in the market that Kamala Harris is leading our markets, Amy Klobuchar behind, and then Elizabeth Warren. Who is your pick for who Biden might choose?
So I'll tell you, I thought, and this goes back to when she was still a candidate, I thought the Biden-Harris ticket could be a really strong one, and I've never wavered from that. She brings a lot of things to the ticket that Biden needs. She's a woman. She's of color. She's relatively young, and one of the things we've learned in vice presidential politics and choices over the past couple generations is, yes, it can help to pick somebody from a state, but it doesn't really make much of a difference. A state that you need to win. It's more about what image you're projecting with that candidate. It's why I think Kamala Harris has always been my top choice. Amy Klobuchar, I think, certainly should be on that short list as well. That may cause some problems with the far left as far as Klobuchar having some more moderate views. But again, what I think would really excite women voters and extend that gender gap that Biden has. And also for those folks who want to vote for Biden, but are nervous about things tilting too much to the left, Klobuchar speaks well. Elizabeth Warren, and feel free to, and Stacey Abrams, I'd say for that matter, feel free to tar and feather me if I'm totally wrong on this. But I've never thought either one of them has a chance to be picked. Both would be on the short list for the more cosmetic reasons of wanting to make various groups happy and so forth. But I don't think either one really brings much to Biden. Warren could outshine Biden. She would certainly pull him further and further to the left, which is a real problem for Biden. Already as he's dealing with Bernie, and he's just announced AOC is going to be the co-chair of his climate change initiative. He doesn't need to be pulled any further to the left, I think, to attract those, independent-minded voters out there who still are out there. It's smaller than we've ever seen before, but they're still there. For Stacey Abrams, to be blunt about it, she hasn't really done much. She was the minority leader in Georgia, and that's pretty much it. She ran a great campaign, no question about it, but she didn't win it. Just as Beto O'Rourke ran a great campaign against Ted Cruz, but didn't win it. You don't really typically get an award for losing in politics. And Republicans would tell you they would love to run against Stacey Abrams. The research book, the Oppo book on her is really, really thick. And then my wild card pick would be Tammy Duckworth, who kind of has gotten some attention, then falls short. I think Duckworth could be interesting, given that she's a veteran. She was critically wounded in her service. Somebody who's pretty hard to attack. Certainly, the Trump campaign is going to go after anybody they can hard. It's really, really tough and could backfire if you're going after Tammy Duckworth. Michelle Obama, honestly, I think could be the strongest pick that Biden could make in a lot of reasons, and she could outshine him and have it not matter. But that seems to be too far-fetched. And the Whitmer boomlet has really dropped over the past few days. And the more interviews she's done, I think the less favor she's done for herself.
And so what do you think about timing? What for the announcement? Obviously, such an odd year. We don't know if there are going to be conventions. So also, do you think there's going to be a convention, a Democratic convention? But what do you think about the timing for a VP announcement? When do you see that happening?
Yeah, for Biden, there's no reason to do it now. He's got his search committee, and that can go on for a week. That can go on for several weeks, or really for another 2 or 3 months for that matter. I don't think he necessarily gains anything in this environment by announcing right now. And the reason for that is the vice presidential announcement is as big an announcement as any presidential candidate can make. And you do that, when you do that, you time it to maximize the media coverage that you'll get coming out of that. And if he were to pick any of the people that we're just talking about right now, or in a week or 2 weeks, I think it's pretty clear that would get a little bit of talk and traction on TV and online, but would very quickly go back to whatever the news of the day is on coronavirus, whatever the death toll is, the economic impact. And look, Donald Trump plays a role here as well. And if Joe Biden makes an announcement at 5 p.m. and Trump comes out in the Rose Garden at 5:30 p.m., well, that means there's a whole hour where we've stopped talking about what should be the best news that the Biden campaign can make. And yeah, there'll be some returning to it at night and in the morning, but Trump, has a real card here that he can play that will just step on any announcement that Biden can make. And so those two things combined would tell me that it would be a mistake to do it in the very near future.
And so perhaps a time when Democrats have more sustained media attention, which would be potentially a convention, right? That would make almost more sense. But what do you think about the chances of there being conventions, and what do you think those will look like?
Yeah, most likely what we could see would be two different scenarios, one for Republicans and one for Democrats. Democrats have been a lot more cautious in how they've gone through this process. They've been more in favor of stay-at-home orders and things like that. On the Republican side, we've seen, and the protests speak to this, but it's also more of a message that comes from the White House through talk radio, through the Republican base, members of Congress. They want the country open now, and frankly never want it closed, and they don't want to wear face masks. So we could see more of an event in Charlotte than anything we see in Wisconsin for Democrats. And there's an interesting kind of conversation happening a little bit below the surface on this as to whether or not this may be ultimately the death knell for political conventions as we know it. And a lot of folks in the political class, Republicans and Democrats, would privately tell you these things are bloated, they cost too much money, the media pop that you get for it isn't really worth everything that goes into it. And I think most people don't realize it's not that you start up working on Charlotte or Milwaukee today. The RNC's had people in Charlotte for 2 years now. The DNC's had people in Milwaukee for 2 years. And there's a lot of expense that goes with that. So what we may see after, in 2024, for instance, is something much shortened, 1 or 2 days, not the 4-day real just massive event that the conventions have become. Again, I think we may see two different kind of scenarios here, and part of that is look at what the president has said. Yeah. He misses his rallies, he misses his events, he feeds off them, and Joe Biden, locked in the basement right now, is actually being somewhat effective. He's not doing media interviews all day, every day, but he's picking and choosing where to be out there. He's having an effect. Obviously, he's had to talk about the Tara Reade allegations, but this has served him well right now. It also means that he's not being overworked, which is not insignificant. And so, conventions or not, we may see just a very different, what would normally be the post-convention campaign of you're in Florida, Philadelphia, Wisconsin, and Michigan all in the same day. It appears, in this campaign that may not happen.
Yeah. Well, and so as we look forward into the presidential election, and we could look across our markets, we have the electoral college markets, we have the market for who will win the presidency, and then we have the senatorial down ballot races. And when you look at the presidential market, Donald Trump remains very strong. You've seen some dips over the course of the coronavirus, but he seems to maintain a pretty hearty lead. And then once you start digging deeper into some of the battleground states that he needs to win in the electoral college, those don't seem to show a map is clearly to the presidency. And then even when you're looking at senatorial down ballot races in battleground states, Democrats seem to be favored heavily in our markets. What do you make of that? Do you think that the Trump brand is so strong that people are iffy to bet against it? Do you think that people are going to be diverging from straight ticket voting? What do you think's going on? What's the phenomenon there?
Sure, but part of it is we're learning a lesson. We may be overlearning it from 2016. So many people, myself included, said all along Donald Trump can't win. And I would say, in my defense and defense of a lot of colleagues, I said it because Sean Spicer told me that, and Reince Priebus told me that, and they were telling a lot of people that. And typically, if somebody tells you that they're going to lose something, you believe them. So obviously, Trump shocked a lot of people, and we don't, to borrow from the Who song, we don't want to get fooled again. That's a big part of it. Two, Trump comes at this now with advantages that he didn't have last time. Again, one of the reasons that a lot of people thought that Trump couldn't win was he had no real campaign. There was no structure. They hadn't raised a lot of money. And we would see those things in both the sense of the monthly FEC reports and numbers of people who were being hired on the ground. And then you'd hear about it anecdotally. I'm from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and I was home in the summer of 2016 and decided to stop by the Republican Party headquarters just to see, what the situation was like, there. And they didn't have any yard signs. They didn't have any bumper stickers, not to argue that yard signs or bumper stickers win campaigns, but they didn't have those things. And when I spoke to the person in the office who I had worked on a previous Senate campaign with, I was told, we don't really hear a lot from the Trump campaign. We're going to do everything we can for them, but we don't really hear a lot. So we're focused more now on the gubernatorial candidate. We're focused on the Senate race and so forth. And those kinds of anecdotal things, again, fed into this is amateur hour on the Trump campaign. It's not a professional team. This time it's a very professional team. They are flush with money, and part of the reason that you can't write off Trump is he's just starting to spend the money. And he, over the coming weeks, may try and define Joe Biden before Joe Biden has a chance to really define himself, which for somebody who was vice president for 8 years to be defined by your opponent in just an onslaught of money is something we haven't really seen before. And we don't know. These kind of things sometimes are unknowable. Hillary had the great, the absolute best team that ever had been assembled practically in modern American politics, and she lost. Trump now has a very strong and extremely well-financed team. Those things, as a political professional, I would say those always matter, but we don't know in what proportion those matter. It does give a lot of people concern.
Yeah, and so when we look at states, you mentioned North Carolina, you're from North Carolina, so this should be a little bit of fun for you. When we mention states like North Carolina, you have the Senate race where the Democrats are leading in our markets 63-39. And then in the Electoral College, it's the last time I checked today, these things change a little bit, was 52-48. What do you make of the disparity between that or the disparity between the Electoral College and then the Senate race?
Yeah. One, so just anecdotally, the day after the Access Hollywood tape came out, I was in Raleigh or in the Raleigh area and went to 2 events with Senator Burr. And, he told me very clearly, the comments are terrible. I have to criticize them. And of course I'll do that, but I can't walk away from him. Because if I walk away from Trump, the election's over tomorrow. And his goal was always to overperform Donald Trump. In late September of 2020, or excuse me, 2016, we didn't know if Donald Trump was really going to win North Carolina or not. And if he did, was he going to win it with 49.9, 51%? 55%, what was that number going to be? And there were a lot of folks who thought that Hillary had a chance to win. So Burr's strategy was, I have to overperform Donald Trump. And that is going to be critical for a lot of the races we're talking about. Tom Tillis has a real challenge here in that a lot of the Trump voters don't trust him. He wrote a letter or an editorial column in the Washington Post last year criticizing the emergency order at the border that Trump made. And then not immediately, but very quickly walked it back. So he planted a very big flag on a key issue for Trump and said no, and then walked it back. And so he gets no credit from Democrats for standing against it. He gets no credit from Republicans for walking it back. So it's very easy to see how some Republicans don't trust him and may not cast a ballot in the Senate contest or what have you. And if I'm advising the Cal Cunningham campaign in North Carolina, I would tell them, find those Republican voters, especially where you can identify the more conservative, say in the eastern or far western part of the state, who have voted in every Republican primary, since '96 or something like that, and start direct mailing them, especially those older voters, the Tom Tillis editorial piece, and just kind of sow some of that distrust that may be out there. I think it'd be a very effective strategy. I will say, though, Democrats have been touting Cal Cunningham as the best candidate that they could ever hope for. And that may be true, but the reality is we just don't know that yet. Yeah. He has run, we talk about Joe Biden being in the basement. North Carolina Republicans talk about Cal Cunningham hiding in his basement. You don't see him. You don't hear from him a lot. He's pretty absent on a lot of the key questions of the day. He just finally said something on the Tara Reade allegations. Big surprise, he believes Biden. But he's running a campaign strategy where you don't see a lot from him. So, and the belief being that he can beat Tillis by kind of running in absentia to some extent. We'll see if that's a successful strategy or not. But we don't know if he's a great candidate. I've heard that Cal Cunningham is going to be the great candidate for a long time, and not just against Tillis. He was looking at running against Burr as well. We'll see if that's true or not.
And so you think that, and I suppose I should ask, do you think that as you're looking at each individual state and each individual race, you really have to dig into the candidates in order to figure this out, that straight ticket voting might be diverging this election?
Well, we've seen, there are less ticket splitters, that we've seen this as a trend now for 20 years, if not longer. But what we know is Republican candidates, again, depends on the state, but for a lot of Republican candidates, your best strategy is to somehow overperform Donald Trump. Because Trump won a lot of these states very narrowly. Michigan, there's a very close Senate race. Donald Trump won that by 0.2%. In Maine, there's a very big Senate race. Hillary Clinton won that by 3 points. Wisconsin, 0.8. Florida, 1.2. So as you're looking in Senate races, also some congressional races, that's going to play a big role in this. And, none of this addresses the situation that we're in right now. And one of the reasons, and I'll apologize in advance if I answer questions and just say I don't know, is there's a lot that we don't know right now of, what is going to happen to the death toll, to the economic impact. We know it's not going to be good, but just to kind of make up numbers for a moment, if the first week of November, the death toll from COVID is 120,000 Americans, and the unemployment rate announced on the first Friday of November is 13.5%. Are those good numbers or bad numbers? In a normal scenario, there's no chance that Trump can even think about being reelected with a 7% unemployment rate, much less 13.5. But if that's seen as the economy starting to move back in the right direction, does Trump get credit there or not?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. You made it to me when we chatted yesterday. And so what we were saying is it's either positive bad news or bad news.
Right.
So, but either way, possibly bad news. So as we move into tomorrow, Rick Wright is testifying. We have a market on whether or not Dr. Fauci will remain the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease by June 1st. It seems pretty strong in favor of yes. Do you think Rick Bright's testimony has any bearing?
This is the trouble when you get into, what should happen and the world that we're in.
Yeah.
Look, Fauci is in a precarious, but I think still safe position. And one of the things that you see from other folks who have been fired, whether it's during this process or other processes, and Fauci is, he may disagree with the president, but you've never seen him say the president's wrong. You've never seen anything leaked to the Washington Post or Maggie Haberman at the New York Times of in the meeting after the meeting with Trump, Fauci said this derogatory comment about the president. If that were happening, he'd already be gone. And I think Trump does realize the credibility that Fauci has with the broader public. And so I would absolutely take that bet for now. Long term, the challenge I think for Fauci is there's a discontent that is being sowed on talk radio every day. Limbaugh was talking about it today. Sean Hannity talks about it. Mark Levin. And so you're going to hear more and more from Trump's base. Well, he's got to get rid of Fauci. And one thing that we know about Trump is, one of the things that, and I should say with full disclosure, for the audience, I was comms director at the RNC, worked a bunch of campaigns and multiple offices in Capitol Hill for Republicans. I consider myself a conservative Republican. I didn't vote for Trump. I wrote in Paul Ryan. Not that I thought that he had a chance to win, but just that as background. I always thought that Donald Trump had an ability to cut a deal that a President Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio or whomever wouldn't have been able to cut. The deal on guns, the deal on climate, the deal on immigration, these things that if Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio had done them, they would have been killed by the Republican conference and the Republican base. But what we've seen is Trump never moves in any way to get sideways of his base. He is beholden to it in a way that, most politicians try and take their base somewhere. Maybe they're successful, maybe they're not, but they have their base to then do something with it. Trump remains right there with it. And if that gets to, some kind of a fever pitch, then that could be darker days for Dr. Fauci.
So we're going to open this up to some questions. And so if you have a question, there's a little part at the bottom of your screen that you're going to be able to go ahead and raise your hand. And if we can, so if there are any attendees that have a question, raise your hand. I do have a question in the Q&A. So we'll go to, I see one hand raised. We'll do the Q&A and then we'll come over to you. Do you believe that the virtual conventions in some states like Texas provide a roadmap for an impromptu virtual DNC? Do virtual state conventions make it more likely for a virtual national convention?
Again, I think there'll be a party split.
Yeah.
Democrats, we will have, however these things shake out, they will be in somewhat different formats. 4 years ago, 8, 12 years ago, the conventions are all the same. It almost could be run by the same people. Same format, same, planning for the penultimate night to be a big night, but then the real explosion, the night that the nominee, accepts the nomination. That's going to change in some regard. I would say it changes more for Democrats than for Republicans again. And that's where things like virtual conventions, can have more of an impact. Again, I think it'll be more for Democrats for Republicans. Republicans, the Trump base, they would take canceling the convention, at least canceling it as a whole, as some kind of, stay-at-home order, sign of weakness. And you could see, Donald Trump does not like to be called weak on anything. So things like that should suggest that there will be some form of a live event Republican convention. If we see a virtual one, and again, that could change as, if that death toll instead of being at 120 is at 180, those facts could change things. But I think it's more likely that we'll see the Democrats do something like that than Republicans. It also raises to me, what I think is a pretty interesting question these days about mail-in ballots.
Hmm.
And Republicans have actually done pretty well on mail-in ballots, and Republican governors have managed it successfully. The congressional special election in California last night was a role model for how Republicans should do mail-in ballots. Unfortunately, when your president rails on them, that makes that a harder reality.
Yeah.
And
So
I'm drinking water, by the way. I apologize.
no, we'll get you next time we have you. We'll get you a nice bottle of wine. So Doug is a wine drinker, a connoisseur, I would say, somewhat. But so the next question I would say is, or that we have is, would Pence be the clear successor if Trump had to resign for health or other reason?
If he had to resign immediately, yes. If Trump is reelected, Pence, in theory, is the front runner, but there will be a lot of people gunning for that seat. Nikki Haley comes to the top of the list. Tom Cotton certainly is looking at it. Josh Hawley from Missouri, who maybe not everybody knows, is trying to make a name of himself. I could see him doing a run. There'll be other Republican governors who are looking at it as well, maybe a member of Congress or two. And, one of the things that we've learned is there's an incentive for people to run for president, whether they have a chance of becoming president or not.
We've seen an
serves
awful lot of folks doing that recently, haven't we?
Yeah, look,
Yeah.
I will tell you, I met Pete Buttigieg at a Harvard Institute of Politics event in 2015, and I thought, wow, this guy is going places. I didn't think he was going to the Oval Office, and never thought that during the campaign.
Yeah.
But who couldn't have been impressed by him? And he will be able to do whatever he wants now, in the future, so to speak. If you're a Republican, a lot of those folks, they leave the race and they become a Fox News contributor, the next day. So there's an incentive to run for president now, and having, even though I think it's detrimental to the process or to the process of wanting to have a strong nominee, 15 people, 17 people running, the 2-night debates and so forth. But Pence will try and declare himself, the heir to the Trump presidency, and he'll have good reason to. But he will have a lot of people gunning for that, for the nomination against him. And then we won't know, after 8 years of Donald Trump, does the party want to change? And I think there will be a lot of Republicans who will want to change. And then how much of that is, how Trumpy, so to speak, is that nominee going to be? How much does a Nikki Haley run as a Trump person, or somebody who served in the administration loyally and capably, but here's my vision? And that's going to be a big part of that as well.
Okay, we're going to do 2 more questions and then we'll let you go. So how do you think things will play out if Trump loses and then tells his supporters that the election was rigged? Do you see a possible uprising from the far right?
Yes, I mean, to use one word, badly. And I was troubled to see Jared Kushner now talking about delaying the election, which, by the way, not only does he have no power to do, the president basically doesn't have the power to do either, short of a full state of emergency martial law kind of thing. And even then, it's not certain to me that he can. I have a lot of fears of what could happen in this election. Trump losing and refusing to leave the White House, the Oval Office, or just declaring it a rigged process, is one of them. And, I'm very concerned about the fabric of the country these days. Republicans don't talk to Democrats, even if they live next door to each other. We don't like each other. We don't trust each other. And we see that, on everything, including face masks, where a face mask is supposed to protect me from you. There's a broad strain of the Republican base that, that's their "don't tread on me" flag. Mm. Similarly, I have a very big concern of Trump winning and this scenario exists where Trump could win with a smaller electoral college margin than he did, but lose the popular vote by more than he lost it last time. California numbers could be bigger. Mm-hmm. Texas and Georgia will, I think, certainly be closer than they were last time. And again, that gets to the fabric of the country, where it's already frayed and we constantly seem to be pitting each other against each other. The president obviously has helped that or not helped that, depending on your perspective. But that becomes where we get a real inflection point that scares a lot of people. And again, at a time when we're at whatever the unemployment rate is going to be in November, but it's not going to be at 4.5%, the country is already going to be on edge.
Yeah. So we actually have two more questions because I really, really like these. Sorry, it's been a lot of fun to talk to you. I always learn things, so we're really grateful to have you. Does the California 25 mean the Republicans could win the House?
No.
Okay.
This was a great night for Republicans, and a great night for the NRCC. They deserve a lot of credit. They found a fantastic candidate in Mike Garcia. And I can tell you, having worked a long time in California politics, I've had a lot of very unhappy special election nights in California, in Santa Barbara, in Rancho Cucamonga, places like that, Fresno, where we just didn't get it. We just didn't get somebody through. And this is the first time in more than 20 years that a Republican has picked up a Democratic seat in California. It's great news. But if you look at the map and you look at Republican fundraising, candidate fundraising, they're really taking it on the chin. And this is becoming a bigger and bigger concern within the party committee. I'd tell you the Senate has the same challenges in front of them. And we're talking about whether or not Republicans can maintain the Senate. So, a scenario for whatever happens in the presidential election where Republicans win the House and potentially could lose the Senate, even having that as two kind of countervailing conversations has never happened. It just seems to me to be beyond possibility.
Okay. And last question before we let you go. What do you think of Jeff Sessions' attempt to reclaim his Senate seat?
I'm all for it. Sessions, you got to love him or not, but he's not giving up. He's got a really tough road to hoe, and it all comes down to how heavily does the president lean in, and does that matter? What we've seen so often with Trump is he can take somebody who has been in office for a long time, has loyalty by those voters, and that changes overnight. And I'll give you an example, again, being from North Carolina, I think it was Columbus Day weekend. Yeah, Columbus Day weekend of 2017. I was in Winston-Salem, my hometown, also hometown of Senator Burr. And Senator Burr had represented Winston-Salem in Congress since 1994. And 3 times that weekend, keep in mind, Trump had been president for 10 months at this point. 3 times that weekend, I had Republican voters say some variation to me of, Richard needs to knock off this investigation. He's going too far. That was 10 months, right? So with voters who had known Richard and voted for him for 20 years. So he has that same ability with Jeff Sessions. Sessions isn't Trump's guy, though he's sure painting himself to be. And if Trump weighs in there, that's Tuberville's to win. I admire Sessions' moxie for getting back in, but it's a tough one for him. And it shouldn't be. And again, in a normal world, Sessions leaves the Department of Justice and basically takes back his Senate seat with no problem. But he's got real problems in this one.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of other great questions I'm sorry we can't get to, but we're going to have to end it there. Doug, this has been an absolute pleasure. I'm always so grateful.
Thank you. Happy to, anytime.
Yeah, and cheers to everyone. Thank you for joining PredictIt's first happy hour. We're hoping to have many more. Please email us. You can email press@predictit.org with any suggestions. If you have anybody that you think we should talk to, we'd love to have a bigger exchange about everything. So thank you, everybody. One quick thing, the ending of the polls, I believe the most of you are drinking LaCroix or craft beer. So that's good news. And then 52% of you would put your money behind the presidential candidate you plan to vote for. 21% would not, and 28% remain undecided. So whatever you take from that about the larger electorate, that's interesting. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.